Yeah, hello and welcome to the live chat session for Arrays. My name is Curtis George. I'm an adjunct professor at SNHU, and we're going to go ahead and start talking about arrays. And I'm going to start out with a integer array. And how I actually create an array is with two brackets. If I was to create a normal variable, we'll just call this variable here. The only difference when you actually create an array is that you use two brackets to define an array, and in this case we'll call it variables. Um, so in order to actually initialize this array, we're going to have to use a new keyword. Actually, when you create an array this way, you actually have to instantiate the array, and the way you do that is you use the new keyword. And we have the thing with arrays. Basically, what an array is that if we want to create a bunch of arrays into a class, we would actually basically stuff that into a container. And the way we do that is that we can instantiate the array and actually create elements of that array. In this case, basically what we're telling Java to do is that we're telling it to create enough space for at least 3 integers. And the good thing about arrays is that we can actually use this to actually call these different numbers or variables depending on what we're going to actually declare. Each array, actually the one thing to think about when you think about arrays is that when we index an array, we start out from 0, and when we actually iterate or go through an array, even though we set up enough elements, like for example in this case 3, when we iterate through an array, it's going to be like 0 through 2. Once we create an array, we can actually start adding variables to it. Actually, I'm just going to throw an error because it's the same name. So to basically add an element to this array, we're going to start out the index 0, and we'll just give it some value. And since we used or made our array like an array of 3 integers, we'll actually create 3 spots for it. And if we can actually access these different elements by actually using the index. And when I talk about index, I'm talking about these numbers here. So here we'll kind of show that when we do a system out on our print. And in this case, we'll just do the first one here. And we'll go ahead and build that, run it. Just add an S there. Go ahead and run it again. You could just do Control R to actually run. Actually, that'll build and run the program. Okay, and as you can see, we got the result of 345 in the output, which is the actual first index in our array. Another way we can do this, I'll go ahead and show you a different way we can actually initialize this array. So actually, instead of actually initializing the array and then actually adding variables to the array, we can actually just add a bracket or curly braces and go ahead and add values. And what this does, actually, it replaces and what I was kind of trying to show you here too is this right here. There's is basically this basically five lines of code here is the same as this one line of code here, which we can do to also initialize an array. So I can actually go ahead and comment all this out. Oops, except for that one. And this is actually going to work the same as all this code right here. So I'll go ahead and run this and show you that. Okay, as you can see, I called the first element or index in this array, and that resulted in the first element in that array. And you kind of, basically with arrays, they all start at 0, and kind of the way you can think of that is like a house, for example. Basically, because you're using references in arrays, the first reference is going to be 0 because that's where your starting point is. If you go one house over, for example, then that your next reference from or distance from your house is going to be one house away. I guess I don't know if that's a good way to think of it, but that basically in all programming we actually for at least for arrays we start out at 0. And I kind of want to show you something pretty cool here actually. I'm going to go ahead and uncomment all this again. Okay, I didn't do it. It's actually going to uncomment. You're going to do Control-Shift/. And let's say, for example, I accidentally forget to initialize the first element in the variables array. What Java does, which is a very nice thing, is they have default values that it will default to when you actually run this program. Like for example this one, because I didn't declare it, it is going to default to 0, which is actually quite nice because in other programming languages it doesn't do this and it'll actually throw an error. Same thing with string arrays, for example. Let's see, let's go ahead and just get rid of that. Let's go ahead and make this a string array. And the thing about arrays is that you have to keep them the same type of declaration, otherwise you'll get errors. And because we're doing a string array, you have to declare a string, and you do that with quotes. Oops. So now if I print this out, I should get the first string here. Actually, this is kind of what I was wanting to test or show you here. Let's go ahead and uncomment that and comment that. When I do a string array, oops, okay, that's going to throw an error because that is not a string. Sorry, this is so slow, but this is actually my son's development computer. If you'll notice, there's a Minecraft symbol on the bottom. He actually programs Java for Minecraft. Because basically to make mods, you have to actually use Java. So yes, it's convenient to have a dad who knows a little bit about Java. So, and kind of the cool thing here is now if I comment the first element out here, it's going to actually default to a different kind of value, which is what I'm going to show you right now. Okay, it's coming. Wow, it defaulted to a null value. That is the default value for a string, and just kind of keep that in mind when you're creating loops. That actually becomes useful later on when you're looking for a terminating value, especially when you're doing loops for strings. I just want to let you guys know about that and what it is, and that could be useful later on. Okay, another useful thing to do here, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this top stuff here, and we're just going to go with my second way I initialized, and we're going to go over how to iterate through this array by creating a for loop. I'm going to go ahead and start with I equals 0, since we always start with 0, and I'm going to go through the array, and I want to try to get to the end of the array. In this case, we have 3 elements, but I'm going to go ahead and use this handy dandy keyword here. If you say it's variable's length, that's going to be the length of the actual array, and because it's actually less than that value, the value being 3, the length is 3, the loop is actually going to stop at 2. So your index is going to go basically from 0 to 2, 0, 1, 2. So keep that in mind. And that kind of makes it really convenient that, the reason why it actually starts from 0. And of course I want to create a count for the loop. And I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this. And instead of adding a 0 or putting a 0 there, we're going to, actually I'm going to get rid of that, put an I here. So iterating through the loop just means going through each element in the loop, and that's the way you do it, is with a for loop. So let's go ahead and try this out. Oh, all kinds of errors. Okay. Oh, I didn't define I. So we'll define I as an int. Go ahead and rebuild. And there we go. 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6. And you can kind of just go through here and, like here, make that a print line, make it look better. And I'll keep them separate. Be a string, another string array, because I want to show you some pretty neat actually. Since we're talking about iterating through a loop. Everybody does understand what, all the stuff I'm talking about, the indexes, the elements, iterating through a loop. Sorry, I'm typing so slow. I'm not used to my son's keyboard, I guess. Okay, so basically the same thing here. I'm going to go ahead and okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, the cool thing about string arrays is it has a different way of actually iterating through the loop. So I could call this, let's see, we'll call it string, and we'll call it a variable. When it iterates through the loop, it's going to call each of the elements that it's going through variable. And I'm going to call the loop that I'm using here variables. And this is actually going to do the same thing as when I use the indexing. So here, instead of calling the index here, all I have to do is call variable, and that should actually give us the same result. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and compile it and run it. Okay, 1, 2, 3. It's kind of a just FYI type sort of thing, a little shortcut there when you're actually using a string, a way, or try to figure out a way to actually iterate through a string array. Okay, now I'm going to switch back and we're going to actually talk about two-dimensional arrays. And this actually becomes quite handy, especially when in gaming, or especially when trying to find a coordinate of something. And basically what a two-dimensional array is, or a multi-dimensional array is that it's basically an array of an array. So like, for example, in this case, I want 3 variables, so I'm going to use let's see, let's say 10, 15, and 20. Okay, now I want to use an array of an array. So in this case, I'll create a second array. We'll call it 100, 200, 300. Okay, and since it's an array of an array, we have to create a couple more brackets around those 2 arrays. So in this case, if we want to, or the way it works is these are actually called rows, and this is called a column, each one of these. And if you want to actually call like a different one of these elements, you have to start out with the overall array first, which is this here, the rows. So this first array here is considered 0, and this second array here is considered a 1. And then inside the array, both arrays, this is actually index 0, index 1, and index 2. So let's say, for example, we want to, let's try to see if we can actually display the 200. So in this case, let's go and make two square brackets here. This would be the array 0, array 1. So the first index would be the 1. Okay, we want to find the second element of this array, so it'd be 0, 1. So to display the 200, we have to do 1, 1. So let's try this out. I'm going to go ahead and compile and run it. Ooh, lots of errors. Okay. Oh, that's because I didn't change my for loop. So let's go ahead and I don't need to actually do a for loop because I'm just trying to print it out. But we will use a for loop here in a second to actually iterate through this array. Oops. And of course I need to make that variables. Let's try this again. Okay, there we go. 200. Okay, let's try something else. We're going to iterate through this actual two-dimensional array. And the way we do that, go ahead and comment these. We're going to start our for loop over again. So this time we're going to include the int. And actually I'm going to call this row, since we're going to iterate through the row first. So row equals 0. Of course we want row less than variables and while length. And we also want to add our little counter here. Okay. In order to iterate through a two-dimensional array, we're going to have to create two for loops. So let me go ahead and do that. Now the second one, I'm actually going to call, or the integer I'm using, I'm going to call column. I'm just going to use COL, but I'm also going to start at 0. And in this case, let's see, I have to do the row, so column. Using variables. And since I'm iterating through the row at the top here, I'm going to use that as my index for going down the columns. And I have to use length too, because I want to know basically what this length is here, which is 3. So the first loop, for loop, is actually going to go through 2 times this outer one, because I'm using this variable's length here. Oops, better make that a variable then. The second one is actually going to go through these columns here because I'm actually using the row for the length, which in this case is 3. And let's go ahead and add a counter here. And of course we need brackets. And I need one more bracket. Okay, now that we have that, let's go ahead and change our indexes here to row and column. And see what that gives us. I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a little tab, just to make it prettier. And for this line, I'm actually going to add print line, just so we can separate the rows. Oops. Yeah, I think that'll work. Okay. So let's go ahead and build and run that. Oh, lots of errors. And it's because we use variables length. Oh, it doesn't like the my length there. So that's variables dot length. Just 2 by 2. Okay. I don't know. See, that should work. Variables row column. Can I spell that? Oh, because I'm using COL. And I'm using row there. So okay, so we're still back to that, and I didn't add a T there. And this is troubleshooting 101. Let's see, column equals. Okay, so that should work. And cannot be converted to Boolean. Okay. Actually, let's just do this. Okay. Doesn't like my length there for some reason. It's misspelled it or something here. why that's not working. It's basic Java. Maybe it doesn't like my variable's name or length. Okay, it's saying I have int that cannot be converted to a boolean. And now I can use rows here. Now let's try it. Okay, now what do we got here? Here cannot find symbol. We did use row. We did not use rows. Alright, so let's go ahead and run that again. Oh, I think we got it. Yay. Okay, I have tabs here. Oh, it's because I'm printing line each time here. I don't want to print line, I just want to do a tab. Okay, let's try that again. There you go. Okay, I got a question for you then. Can anybody tell me what this is up here? Right next to the main, what value are we passing here? Kind of looks like an array, doesn't it? In fact, it actually is a string array. And what you can do here, I don't know if my son has a console on here. This is a Windows 10. I've never used Windows 10 before. But basically what you can do, or what this is actually for, is that you can pass a value from the console to your program as a string array. So basically when you're compiling your program, or not compiling, but running your program, for example, you can say Java my program, and you can pass it a value. You know, like for example, file, oops, to our array. Yep, that's a good question. So let's go ahead and copy this here. And I'm going to go ahead and comment all this out. Let's see, so that's 2. And the way you can actually find this is that since this is an array of an array, like from these, you can tell from these brackets here, the way it works is this is actually the first row, and this is the second row. So this is actually being, the first row is actually being indexed as row 0. The second row is actually being indexed as row 1. So if we want to find the row that number 15 is, we would actually use, in this case, 0. It's in row 0, which is the first array. Now if we want to find what index it is in that array, 15, we start out at 0, 1, and 2. So the 15 is at index 1 in the column. So all we have to do is put a 1 there, and oops, let me go ahead and comment this out. Actually, let me keep that. So let's go ahead and run this. And like I said before, this actually is a very useful thing to know, especially when you're developing games.